I was standing in the dim hallway outside the conference room when I heard my father say the words that froze me where I stood. "It's still my company," he declared, his voice filled with a kind of stubborn pride that no longer felt familiar. "I built it. I control it. And she'll do what I tell her to do." She was me, his daughter, the woman who had kept the company breathing while he spiraled into his own vanity. And the audience he was speaking to wasn't a boardroom of executives, but my own son, his grandson, whom he had pulled aside like a co-conspirator. I leaned closer, my heart beating too loudly in my ears, as he added, "She thinks she's in charge because I handed her papers. I never read them. Didn't need to. They're ceremonial. This company is mine until I'm in the ground." What he didn't know, what he never imagined, was that those papers he didn't bother to read had already been filed. And legally, the company he believed he controlled no longer belonged to him. I pressed my hand to my chest, not out of guilt or hesitation, but because I finally understood what the next hours would hold. I watched him through the narrow glass window as he laughed, proud of himself. It was the last time he would laugh like that, because the board was convening, and I was about to walk into that room, stand at the head of the table, and reveal what he had signed away in his arrogance. My father believed he was untouchable. He believed I was still the obedient daughter who owed him her success. He had no idea that by sundown, the company he built from nothing would legally and irrevocably be mine alone. And the tragedy was, he had done it to himself. My name is Evelyn Hart, and I am 63 years old. I was not raised to be ruthless, nor did I grow up believing I would ever have to defend myself against the man who taught me to walk, to read, to balance ledger books before I learned algebra. I speak softly, think carefully, and have lived most of my life avoiding unnecessary conflict. But age changes you. Loss changes you. And disappointment, especially when it comes from family, reshapes the quiet places of your spirit. I have spent 4 decades in the business world, much of it in the shadow of my father, who was once a visionary. He started Hart Industrial Solutions in a garage with 2 metal lathes and a stubborn determination that bordered on beautiful when I was a girl. I admired him deeply. He worked long hours, often too long, but he believed in the dignity of creating something with your own hands. If someone had told me 30 years ago that he would one day fight me like an enemy across a boardroom table, I would have laughed. I'm not laughing now. I never wanted his company. I wanted partnership, respect, a sense of continuity between generations. But after my mother passed, he began unraveling, slowly at first, then catastrophically. He became paranoid about control, obsessed with status, unwilling to accept that aging requires grace. When he asked me to step in as COO, it was not an offering, but a leash. He wanted the world to see me at his side, not to see me lead. Yet the company needed leadership. Real leadership. And by the time I realized the extent of the damage he was causing, financial, emotional, reputational, it was already too late to keep pretending we were functioning as a team. He had created the crisis. I was going to have to solve it, even if that meant saving the legacy at the cost of the relationship. My father and I were complicated long before business entered the picture. After my mother died, the house felt hollow, and so did he. He became more demanding, more critical, more dismissive of opinions that didn't mirror his own. Still, I stayed close. I visited, I cooked, I checked in. I told myself grief had simply reshaped him. But grief does not turn a man cruel. That comes from something deeper. My son, Daniel, saw it long before I did. He was 35, smart, careful with his words, and fiercely protective of me. He would come to family dinners and watch my father bark orders or belittle small decisions, then pull me aside afterward and say, "Mom, this isn't normal. You don't deserve to be talked to like that." But he was still my father. I was trained by a lifetime of habit to keep forgiving, keep smoothing the edges, keep hoping things would settle. Family loyalty can become a cage when you don't notice the door has been locked from the inside. The company only amplified the dynamic. He insisted on being in every meeting, even when he added no value. He corrected me in front of staff. He undermined decisions we had already implemented. He humiliated employees who dared to offer ideas. The tension bled into every room we entered together. Yet every time Daniel hinted that I should protect myself legally, I brushed him off. That is, until the day my father's health scare forced him to temporarily delegate power. He called me to his office, placed a stack of papers in front of me, and said, "Just sign these so the bank doesn't give us trouble while I'm in the hospital." He didn't read them. He assumed I wouldn't either. He didn't know Daniel had taught me better. The betrayal came not from what he signed, but from what he did afterward. His health improved, and instead of appreciating the stability I maintained in his absence, he doubled down on his need for dominance. He withdrew large sums from company accounts to fund personal luxuries. He promised contracts we couldn't fulfill. He ignored compliance procedures and mocked anyone who questioned him. Then I discovered the transfer. A quiet, clandestine move he attempted, shifting 48% of company shares into the hands of one of his old drinking buddies, a man with a history of bankruptcies and failed ventures. The paperwork was sloppy, rushed, and riddled with inconsistencies. It was meant to cut me out, to ensure that no matter what the board wanted, no matter what the future required, I would always be outranked. He wasn't trying to save the company. He was trying to punish me for being competent without his permission. When I confronted him, he smirked and said, "You're overreacting, Evelyn. It's still my company. You get your turn after I'm gone." That sentence changed everything, because I realized that no form of loyalty would ever be enough for him. No sacrifice, no dedication, no proof of competence. He would rather burn the company to ashes than let me lead it with grace. But what he didn't realize was that 8 months earlier, during his health scare, he had already signed the one document that stripped him of the authority he believed he still held. I turned to Daniel first. He had warned me for years, and now he helped me sift through decades of financial records, old contracts, and shareholder directives. We reviewed the legal structure line by line until we found exactly what I suspected. The health crisis emergency directive my father had signed was not symbolic at all. It was binding, legally binding, and it transferred majority ownership, permanently, to me. He signed it without reading. He joked afterward that paperwork is for lawyers, and I had smiled, unaware of the future importance of his arrogance. Now that arrogance had become a weapon he accidentally placed in my hands. I hired an attorney, an ethical, meticulous woman named Marin, who reviewed everything. She discovered that my father's attempted share transfer was not only invalid, but fraudulent under corporate law. His friend's involvement made it worse. The board had grounds to remove him entirely. But I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted to protect the company, and myself. We built a timeline. We collected email confirmations. We documented his mismanagement. We archived the volatile messages he sent to employees at odd hours. We compiled financial discrepancies that no responsible leader would excuse. By the time we were done, we had a binder so detailed that even a hostile board couldn't ignore it. The day before the final meeting, I rehearsed what I would say. I didn't sleep. Not because I feared losing, but because I feared what winning might cost me in the quiet of my own heart. The boardroom was silent when I entered. My father sat at the head of the table, confident, leaning back as though the world bent to his posture. His friend hovered behind him like a shadow. Several board members exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the tension. I didn't take my usual seat. Instead, I walked to the front of the room and placed the binder on the table. My father frowned, confused, then irritated. "Evelyn, what are you doing? Sit down." "No," I said calmly. "Not today." I explained everything. The emergency directive, his unauthorized withdrawals, his fraudulent attempt to transfer shares, his verbal abuse of staff, the mounting risk he posed to the company he claimed to love. At first he laughed. Then he argued. Then he shouted. But then I slid the signed directive across the table, his signature unmistakable. The room went still. The lawyer beside me confirmed its validity. The board reviewed it in stunned silence. My father's face drained of color as realization dawned. He had signed away the company. Not to the state. Not to a stranger. To me. His daughter. The only person who had ever tried to protect him. For the first time in my life, he looked small. Not because I diminished him, but because he finally saw the consequences of treating everyone around him as obstacles instead of allies. But I did. Not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. The board voted unanimously to remove him from all executive roles. His attempted share transfer was nullified. His friend was banned from company dealings pending legal review. My father was offered a dignified retirement package, full benefits, continued honorific title, and a private office should he choose to visit. But he refused dignity. He stormed out, slamming doors, shouting down hallways, declaring betrayal to anyone who would listen. Employees who had endured his volatility stood frozen but relieved. There was no celebration, only a collective exhale from people who had been waiting far too long for stability. Days later, he tried to rally old allies, but no one followed him. The evidence was too clear. His decline too obvious. The truth, once spoken aloud, could not be unspoken. His downfall was not spectacular. It was quiet, a slow dissolving of authority, a shrinking into the background of a company that had outgrown his temper and his fear. He became a visitor instead of a ruler, a whisper instead of a storm. And I led with transparency, rebuilding trust brick by brick. We met in the small office he refused to use. He looked older than I remembered, years older than even the previous week. He sat carefully, hands trembling, eyes avoiding mine. He didn't apologize. My father was not a man built for apologies. But he did something I never expected. He asked why. Why I had filed the directive. Why I had taken the company. Why I had turned the board against him. I told him the truth. I didn't take the company from you, I said. You gave it to me when you couldn't control your anger, your fear, or your need to dominate everyone around you. I saved what you built. I protected your legacy, even when you refused to protect me. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He simply lowered his gaze, finally understanding, or perhaps simply acknowledging, that the world he had ruled with force could no longer be bent to his will. Over the following months, our relationship settled into something quieter. Not repaired, not broken, just real. He visited occasionally, not to supervise, but to observe. Employees greeted him with respect, not fear. He saw the order I restored, the efficiency, the renewed morale. And slowly, very slowly, the bitterness faded. We shared lunches. Short ones at first, then longer. He started asking about my plans for the company. Not to control them, but to understand them. And for the first time since my mother died, we spoke like two adults trying to find their way back to one another. Did you ever hate me for it? He asked. I thought about it. Really thought. Then I answered, no. I hated what fear did to you. But I never hated you. He nodded slowly, absorbing the words like sunlight on aging skin. And I realized something then, something that has stayed with me, and will stay with me for the rest of my life. Revenge, when done ethically, isn't about punishment. It's about truth. It's about boundaries. It's about refusing to let someone else's chaos dictate the terms of your existence. My father didn't lose the company because I overthrew him. He lost it because he stopped listening, stopped learning, and believed himself immune to consequences. Legacy isn't built on domination. It's built on humility, on adaptation, on trust. I protected his legacy by confronting the one person he never expected to challenge him. Me. And in the end, he learned to respect me. Not because I demanded it, but because I earned it. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Strength is quiet. Boundaries are love. And justice, when pursued with clarity instead of cruelty, heals more than it harms.